Greetings and salutations. Let's take a quick scan through the chat and see who's here. Angelica, it's lovely to meet you and Fred in person. Kathy B, lovely to see you again. I see Christina Beelan is here. I bet she's watching with Anna and Dari and Olive and Ray. Hello, Emily Thatcher. Kelsey Blaine Gibson. Glad you were okay on Saturday. Nothing terribly frightening at Knott's this last weekend. Just a person with a penchant for climbing high things and meth. Meg Sampson. Hey. My mom is here, Pam. There's where Dari just chimed in with Olive, Ray, and I say hi and Mao. All right, Ruth Sanchez, finally a free Monday indeed. And Nick Davila, hey, how you doing, man? Paul, yeah, I hear you, man. Every time I walk past a mirror, it's kind of like, wow, whose chin is that? Oh, yeah, it's mine. Hey, Nicole Pierce. Hello, darling. David Benjamin, question for Hunter from Amanda's show. Since he is an expert in music and weapons, would a combo maraca / mace be a death rattle? Actually, there is an instrument, and I can't think of what it's called right now, but you've heard it in Latin music. At the very least, you've heard it in the occasional Santana song. Now it's made out of a piece of wood with pieces of metal inside it that rattle. It's kind of shaped like this, and you sort of hold it here and sort of grab these two things together. And it goes, brrr, and that was actually originated from a jawbone of various beasts of burden that you'd smack them and the teeth would rattle. The modern versions are a lot less grisly and a lot more consistent in their sound, funny enough. I bet the name of that thing is going to occur to me as soon as we finish the feed here this evening. Yeah, and then we can, start on the whole thread conversation of murder ballads. Yeah, the shark is back. I was starting to worry that he wasn't feeling well because he would not sit in his place, in his spot. Just would not. He'd sit there for a few minutes just to kind of humor me and just kind of look at me and just kind of like raise an ear. And you know what? I think it's not the spot. I think it's he's sick of that bed. So yes, the shark is back, at least for a while. Yeah, it's the shark bed is adorable. You just can't see him as well, which might be what he likes about it. Actually, Christina sent me this meme of a cat that looked very much like Wolfgang this afternoon, except this cat, I don't know the polite way to say it. This cat looked like Wolfgang's much dumber but genetic brother. He's got just these big round eyes, and they're kind of crossed and sort of just, I don't know how else to express, but not thoughtful looking. And just kind of a, hey, happy to be here. And yeah, instead of Wolfgang's mantra of, I am the night, I am Batman, you are Alfred. This cat just kind of had this sort of funny look on its face, like, I am the afternoon. It was adorable. Yep. David, is this the first time you've seen the shark bed? Is this, we were using the shark bed very, very, very early on. Yeah. I sometimes I even try to just like cultivate ridiculous answers to the ridiculous questions, but sometimes there are legitimate answers, and if I've happened upon them, I am happy to share. Thank you very much, Patty Pinkstaff, who has liked, shared, and saved. Yes, pretty please. Click that click that like button. Click the thumbs up as well. If you can find a like button, tell me where it is. And yeah, share this out to Facebook and whatever social media you are attached to. I don't think Hunter knows about Finding Nemo. Wait. What's the? It's it. Okay, damn it. What was the Finding Nemo reference? I don't even see it now that I did watch the first Finding Nemo. I think I might. Yes, Emily, I have seen Finding Nemo. I think I've actually seen two of them. There's a second one, right? Like they found him and they were looking for something else. I don't know what they would have. I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure I think I've seen two of them. Thank you, Miss Nicole Pierce. Thank you, Miss Nicole Pierce, who liked and saved my friend, even better. Ooh, haha. Okay. Finding Dory. Oh, that's right. Dory got lost. Yeah, they made like this whole joke about goldfish only having 2.5 second memory capacity, I believe. And that was well established in Dory, who, as I'm now recalling, was voiced by Ellen DeGeneres. Yeah, I think I watched Finding Dory. That was the sequel to the first one. All right. Thank you, Emily. You kind of bring up an interesting philosophical question. What would be the sequel to the second one? One would think it would be the third one, but this could be just like a schism in the franchise. I'm not sure. Shark bait, ooh ha ha. I don't actually remember that line. Thank you, Anna. Okay, I'm seeing the theme that there's a cadence of shark bait, ooh ha ha that I'm just not remembering, but I did see the movie. I think I need to do the phrase "how to save a life," but parody it as "how to save and like." Yes, you should, Paul. That would be great vaudacity propaganda. Finding Marlin. I'm not even sure if we're just like sail fishing now or if we're like on a quest to understand Marlon Brando. It was the initiation ceremony when Nemo's in the fish tank. Okay. I kind of remember Nemo being in a fish tank. Yeah, I haven't seen it in a lot of years, but I have seen it. So, how to save and like. And we can get Dan Franklin to do a little piano bit there. Marlin is Nemo's dad. Oh, I totally did not remember that. I mean, he could not, by definition, have actually been a Marlin, but if Marlin was his name, that's totally fair. It would be like getting a German Shepherd and naming it Kitty. And the German Shepherd will be smart enough to respond, but maybe not quite human enough to get it. Yes, Christina, I would certainly watch that. I would certainly watch that again. Yeah. Actually, the director of my first show at Disneyland was also the director of the ride Finding Nemo. And that was the point that I understood for the first time that rides at Disneyland, like a show, have a director. That just like blew my mind. Blew my mind. I just like, yeah, of course they would. I mean, if it was a building project, it would be a foreman. And if it's engineered at Disney, it would be by an Imagineer. And if it's crewed by any person at Disney, it would be a cast member. And if it was put together by any sort of top-down order, any form of head honcho, that would be a director. So, like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. No, it wasn't Turtle Talk. Actually, it was a really good friend of mine that was one of the main voices at Turtle Talk. I knew him from a stunt show outside of Disney. We were in a stunt show together in Buena Park. Pirates Dinner Adventure. Yeah, Matt was. I think Matt was. I don't know if Matt was the first turtle voice, or if Matt was like one of the earlier turtle voices. He was always like upset about that job because it was like non-union, despite it really like apparently should have been union. Okay, so enough about the bourgeois versus proletariat debate of union status of various Disney jobs. I got a couple of authors to offer tonight. One, we're going to revisit Saki, who is the pen name of H.H. Munro. Interestingly, about the guy's name, Saki, as Japanese and alcoholic as it sounds, everything he wrote was extremely, painfully British. And it was Teamsters as opposed to Agva. Oh, seriously? They had Teamsters at Turtle Talk? Wow. Right after I like cut off my own transition from union status conversations of Disneyland. Okay, so yes, let's get to Walt Whitman. Walt Whitman, he was born in 1819, and he died in 1892. So, I mean, the man had full witness of the American Civil War. And that will be relevant in some of the things that we read here this evening. Whitman was America's just definitive world poet. He's sometimes credited as being a latter-day successor to Homer, to Virgil, to Dante, to Shakespeare. In one of his probably his most famous publication, The Leaves of Grass, which he published in 1855, he celebrated democracy, nature, love, friendship. This monumental work chanted praise to the body as well as to the soul, and found beauty and reassurance even in death. Along with Emily Dickinson, Whitman is regarded as one of America's most significant 19th century poets, and would influence later poets, a lot of them, including Ezra Pound, William Carlos Williams, Allen Ginsberg, Simon Ortiz, C.K. Williams, and Martin Espada. Or I think that's actually Martin Espada. Whitman was born on Long Island and grew up in Brooklyn. He received very limited formal education. His occupations during his lifetime, some of those were printer, school teacher, reporter. He did some editing. Whitman's self-published book, Leaves of Grass, was inspired in part by his travels through the American frontier and by his admiration for Ralph Waldo Emerson. Now, if I've not talked about Emerson before on Fireside Tales, Emerson is one of those guys I hold up there alongside with Henry David Thoreau. So this important publication underwent 8 subsequent editions during his lifetime as Whitman expanded and revised the poetry and added more to the original collection of 12 poems. Emerson, the man himself, declared that the first edition of Whitman poetry was, here's the direct quote, "the most extraordinary piece of wit and wisdom that America has yet contributed," unquote. Heavy praise from a god amongst transcendentalists. So, unfortunately, at the time, critics and readers alike found Whitman's style of writing and his subject matter just kind of unnerving. According to the Longman Anthology of Poetry, Whitman received little public acclaim for his poems during his lifetime for several reasons. This openness regarding sex, his self-presentation as a rough working man, so going back to our proletariat conversation on union status of various Disney jobs, and his stylistic innovations. A poet who, quote, abandoned the regular meter and rhyme patterns of his contemporaries, Whitman was influenced by the long cadences and rhetorical strategies of biblical poetry. Now, I can only assume that this was in reference to the 16 King James edition of the Bible, because say what you like about the Bible, the 1611 King James edition is just worded in some just incredibly beautiful language. It's the language of Shakespeare's time, so that should not be at all surprising. Upon publishing The Leaves of Grass, Whitman was subsequently fired from his job with the Department of the Interior. Despite his mixed critical reception in the United States, he was favorably received in England with Dante Rossetti and Algernon Charles Swinburne among the British writers who celebrated his work. Now, during the Civil War, this is kind of an important insight. During the Civil War, Whitman worked as a clerk in Washington, D.C. For 3 years, he visited soldiers during his spare time, dressing wounds, giving solace to the injured. These experiences led to the poems in his 1865 publication called Drum Taps, which included Whitman's elegy for President Lincoln called When the Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed. After he suffered a massive stroke in 1873, Whitman moved to his brother's home in Camden, New Jersey. And although his poetry did not garner popular attention from his American readership during his lifetime, over 1,000 people came to view his funeral. And as the first writer of a truly American poetry, Whitman's legacy endures. I have to throw in one more little piece about Walt Whitman from Wikipedia. Walt Whitman was an American poet, essayist, and journalist. He was a humanist, and that's why I feel particularly compelled to point this little ism out, because that's one of the few things that I will self-identify. I will definitely call myself morally and ethically speaking, I self-identify as a humanist. Whitman was a part of the transition between transcendentalism and realism. Now, transcendentalism is one of my favorite movements, and realism was the absolute necessary successor. So Whitman incorporated both views in his works, so he was kind of like a bridge between these various movements of literature. Whitman is among the most influential poets in the American canon, often called the father of free verse. His work was controversial in its time, particularly his poetry collection called Leaves of Grass, which was described as obscene for its overt sensuality. I am also sometimes described as obscene for my overt sensuality, well intended as it may be. So I can definitely relate to that part. Whitman's own life came under scrutiny for his then presumed homosexuality. Now, in retrospect, since our consciousness has collectively been raised that homosexuality is no longer that big a deal, pretty safe to say the man was gay. I mean, there's no two bits about it. It's just like, I never heard him make such overt declarations, but it's pretty obvious, it's pretty clear. And yeah. Okay, now I'm looking back at the chat. Thank you, Christina. This shirt, I don't know if you can see it. This is my Greg Loiacano shirt. Greg Loiacano is the guitar player, one of the founding members of the Mother Hips. And yeah, the graphic is kind of dark in contrast. So, yes, it was pointed out in phone conversation today, just literally today, that I can use a clinical sounding term like fertile to describe a person that is somehow creepy and or controversial when it's like literally clinically accurate and what the party in question was overtly going for. You know, haters gonna hate, right? So, Dari knew one Walt Whitman poem in particular. I don't know that she only knows one, but I do know that she knows at least one. And that poem is the one I'm going to start with. "O Captain, my Captain. My Captain is a symbol for the end of civil war and for Abraham Lincoln's death. While the voyage symbolizes the war, it also symbolizes Abraham Lincoln's life. When the speaker says that the anchored ship is safe and sound, Whitman is referring to the country being out of war and returning to a state of peace. It's like we seem to be out of the woods." No, Amanda, I was listening to the show, to your show, and all the way to the end of your show, and I did not hear you call me Hunker Ackerman. I was listening, and I did not catch that. Okay, so for those of you who know the movie The Dead Poets Society, this was the centerpiece of Robin Williams' career as a literature teacher. This is O Captain, My Captain. O Captain, My Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack. The prize we sought is won. The port is near. The bells I hear. The people all exulting. While follow eyes the steady keel. The vessel grim and daring. But oh, heart, heart, heart. Oh, the bleeding drops of red whereon the deck my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. Oh, Captain, my Captain, rise up and hear the bells. Rise up, for you the flag is flung. For you the bugle trills. For you bouquets and ribboned wreaths. For you the shores are crowding. For you they call, the swaying mass, their eager faces turning. Here, Captain, dear Father, this arm beneath your head. It is some dream that on the deck you've fallen cold and dead. My captain does not answer. His lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm. He has no pulse nor will. The ship is anchored safe and sound, its voyage closed and done. From fearful trip, the victor's ship comes in with object won. Exult, O shores, and ring, O bells, but I with mournful tread walk the deck my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. From Leaves of Grass, 1891. I may have misspoke earlier in this cast and said 1855. 1891, that came out. So, I'm going to do one more Walt Whitman poem before we move on to a Saki short story. The title of this is I Sing the Body Electric. Now, if this sounds familiar to you, this inspired the title of the showcase song at the end of the 1980 movie Fame. And they clearly saved this up in the Twilight Zone because in 1962, the 100th episode of The Twilight Zone, which must have been in season 4, was an episode written by Ray Bradbury. This later became the basis for Bradbury's 1969 short story of the same name. So this one came from 1855. I Sing the Body Electric by Walt Whitman. One. I sing the body electric. The armies of those I love engirth me, and I engirth them. They will not let me off till I go with them, respond to them, and discorrupt them, and charge them full with the charge of the soul. Was it doubted that those who corrupt their own bodies conceal themselves? And if those who defile the living are as bad as they who defile the dead? And if the body does not do fully as much as the soul, and if the body were not the soul, what is the soul? So there are 9 stanzas to I Sing the Body Electric. And that was number 1. I think we're just going to do numbers 1 and 6 here. Now, number 6 is predicated upon at the time of Walt Whitman's writing, our galaxy, the Milky Way, was presumed to be all of the universe. So he had said earlier, all is a procession. The universe is a procession with measured and perfect motion. But again, the best astronomy had really gotten dialed in was literally just our own galaxy. Our view was so much smaller than reality encapsulates. Do you know so much yourself that you can call the meanest ignorant? Do you suppose you have a right to good sight, and he or she has no right to a sight? Do you think the matter has cohered together from its diffuse float, and the soil is on the surface, and the water runs and vegetation sprouts, for you only, and not for him or her? Yeah. I love that bit at the end of number 1, by the way. I just have to go back and reiterate. If the body does not do fully as much as the soul, ? And if the body were not the soul, comma, what is the soul? ? Whitman was poetically starting to question Cartesian dualism. So there's been this pattern in human thought that goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks, and I'm sure well before the ancient Greeks, just the Greeks were the first to write it down. And René Descartes was the first to give it such a succinct name to this concept. Descartes called it dualism. Descartes defined dualism as the belief in the notion that the body is separate from the experiencer. Anime has turned this into a series called The Ghost in the Shell. I love that title. And Whitman was saying maybe these are not two separate things. Maybe the body and the soul are not divisible in any meaningful way. And if they are, what do we even mean by a soul? But that's a deeper question for another time. Still need to watch Psycho Pass. Yeah, I don't know what Psycho Pass is. Thank you, Meg. That needs a hunter video with a notebook and Sharpie. Yeah, that would be worthy of such effort as required to make such a thing. Hello, Malika. Lovely to see you. And yes, Dari, we will be doing some more Walt Whitman, probably some more yet tonight. We'll see how time bears out. But definitely some more Walt Whitman in the next week or two to come. This is a good preamble. So, moving on to Saki. The dude not too commonly in his own era known as H.H. Monroe. This story made me think of how some people will do and say strange things to get what they want. And like if you ever hear of a hotel that in any way, shape, or form advertises itself as being a haunted place and draws more tourism to it because of this. Like one of my favorite silly conversations that I think I've ever had, the person that I was talking with didn't really see it as a silly conversation. She was asking genuine and sincere questions when we were talking about this haunted hotel over in Lake Arrowhead. And she asked if the place that we were referring to was a real haunted hotel. And I'm like, well, I mean, how do you define real in this like definitively fictional sort of thing? Like the edges of absolute absurdity are well within reach here of this entire conversation. But more on that as the plot unfolds. This story is called The Hedgehog by Saki. A mixed double of young people were contesting a game of lawn tennis at the rectory garden party. For the past 25 years, at least, mixed doubles of young people had done exactly the same thing on exactly the same spot at about the same time of year. The young people changed and made way for others in the course of time, but very little else seemed to alter. The present players were sufficiently conscious of the social nature of the occasion to be concerned about their clothes and appearance, and sufficiently sport-loving to be keen on the game. Both their efforts and their appearance came under the fourfold scrutiny of a quartet of ladies sitting as official spectators on a bench immediately commanding the court. It was one of the accepted conditions of the rectory garden party that 4 ladies, who usually knew very little about tennis and a great deal about the players, should sit at that particular spot and watch the game. It had also come to be almost a tradition that 2 ladies should be amiable and that the other 2 should be Mrs. Dole and Mrs. Hatch Mallard. What a singularly unbecoming way Ava Jonelette has taken to doing her hair, said Mrs. Hatch Mallard. It's ugly hair at the best of times, but she needn't make it look ridiculous as well. Someone ought to tell her. Ava Jonelette's hair might have escaped Mrs. Hatch Mallard's condemnation if only she could have forgotten the more glaring fact that Ava was Mrs. Dole's favorite niece. It would perhaps have been a more comfortable arrangement if Mrs. Hatch Mallard and Mrs. Dole could have been asked to the rectory on separate occasions, but there was only one garden party in the course of the year, and neither lady could have been omitted from the list of invitations without hopelessly wrecking the social peace of the entire parish. How pretty the yew trees look at this time of year, interposed a lady with a soft, silvery voice that suggested a soft, furry thing painted by Whistler. What do you mean by this time of year? demanded Mrs. Hatch Mallard. "Yew trees look beautiful at all times of year. That is their great charm." "Yew trees never look anything but hideous under any circumstances or at any time of year," said Mrs. Dole with the slow, emphatic relish of one who contradicts for the pleasure of the thing. "They're fit only for graveyards and cemeteries." Mrs. Hatch Mallard gave a sardonic snort, which, being translated, meant that there were some people who were better fitted for cemeteries than for garden parties. "What is the score, please?" asked the lady with the soft, furry voice. The desired information was given to her by a young gentleman in a spotless white flannel suit, whose general appearance suggested solicitude rather than anxiety. "Ah, what an odious young cub Bertie Dykson has become," pronounced Mrs. Dole, remembering suddenly that Bertie was a favorite with Mrs. Hatch Mallard. "The young men of today are not quite what they used to be 20 years ago." "Well, of course not," said Mrs. Hatch Mallard. 20 years ago? Bertie Dykson was about 2 years old, and you must expect some difference in appearance and manner and conversation between those two periods, mustn't we?" "Well, you do know," said Mrs. Dole confidentially, "I shouldn't be surprised if that was intended to be clever." Have you anyone interesting coming to stay with you, Mrs. Norbury?" asked the soft, furry voice hastily. "You generally have a house party at this time of year." "Ah, I have the most interesting woman coming," said Mrs. Nordbury, who had been mutely struggling for some chance to turn the conversation into a safe channel. "An old acquaintance of mine, Ada Bleak." "What an ugly name," said Mrs. Hatch Mallard. "Well, she's descended from the De la Bleaks, an old Huguenot family of Touraine, you know." "There weren't any Huguenots in Touraine," said Mrs. Hatch Mallard, who thought she might safely dispute any fact that was at least 300 years old. "Well, anyhow, she's coming to stay with me," continued Mrs. Nordbury, bringing her story quickly down to the present day. "She arrives this evening, and she's highly clairvoyant. A seventh daughter of a seventh daughter, you know, and all that sort of thing." "How very interesting," said the soft, furry voice. "Exwood is just the right place for her to come to, isn't it? There are supposed to be several ghosts there." "Ah, that is why she was so anxious to come," said Mrs. Nordbury. "She put off another engagement in order to accept my invitation. She's had visions and dreams and all those sorts of things that have come true in a most marvelous manner, but she's never actually seen a ghost, and she's longing to have that experience. She belongs to that research society, you know." "I expect she'll see the unhappy Lady Cullumpton, the most famous of all the Exwood ghosts," said Mrs. Dole. "My ancestor, you know, Sir Gervase Cullumpton, murdered his young bride in a fit of jealousy while they were on a trip to Exwood. He strangled her in the stables with a stirrup leather after they had come in from riding, and she is seen sometimes at dusk going about the lawns in the stable yard in a green habit, moaning and trying to get the leather thong from round her throat. I shall be most interested to hear if your friend sees—" "I don't know why she should be expected to see a trashy, traditional apparition like the so-called Cullumpton ghost that is only vouched for by housemaids and by tipsy stable boys when my uncle who was the owner of Exwood, committed suicide there under the most tragical circumstances and most certainly haunts the place. Mrs. Hatch Mallard has evidently never read Popple's Country History, said Mrs. Dole, icily. Or she would know that the Cullumpton ghost has a wealth of evidence behind it. Oh, Popple, exclaimed Mrs. Hatch Mallard scornfully. Any rubbishy old story is good enough for him. Popple, indeed. Now, my uncle's ghost was seen by a rural dean who was also a justice of the peace. I should think that would be good enough testimony for anyone. Mrs. Nordbury, I shall take it as a deliberate personal affront if your clairvoyante friend sees any other ghost except that of my uncle. I dare say she won't see anything at all. I mean, she never has yet, you know, said Mrs. Nordbury, hopefully. It was the most unfortunate topic for me to have broached, she lamented afterwards to the owner of the soft, furry voice. Exwood belongs to Mrs. Hatch Mallard, and we've only got it on a short lease. A nephew of hers has been wanting to live there for some time, and if we offended her in any way, she'll refuse to renew the lease. I sometimes think these garden parties are an absolutely mistake. The Nordburys played bridge for the next 3 nights till nearly 1 o'clock. They actually did not care for the game, but it reduced the time at the guest's disposal for undesirable, ghostly visitations. Miss Bleak is not likely to be in a frame of mind to see ghosts, said Hugo Nordbury, if she goes to bed with her brain a-whirl with royal spades and no trumps and grand slams. Well, I've talked to her for hours about Mrs. Hatch Mallard's uncle, said his wife, and pointed out the exact spot where he killed himself, and invented all sorts of impressive details. And I've found an old portrait of Lord John Russell and put it in her room, and told her that it's supposed to be a picture of the uncle in the Middle Age. If Ada does see a ghost at all, it certainly ought to be old Hatch Mallard's. At any rate, we've done our best. The precautions were in vain. On the 3rd morning of her stay, Ada Bleak came down late to breakfast, her eyes looking very tired but ablaze with excitement, her hair disarranged, and a large brown volume hugged under her arm. "At last, I've seen something supernatural," she exclaimed, and gave Mrs. Nordbury a fervent kiss as though in gratitude for the opportunity afforded her. "A ghost?" cried Mrs. Nordbury. "Not really?" "Really, unmistakably." "Was it an oldish man in the dress of about 50 years ago?" asked Mrs. Nordbury, hopefully. "Nothing of the sort," said Ada. "It was a white hedgehog." "A white hedgehog?" exclaimed both the Nordburys in tones of disconcerted astonishment. "Yes, a huge white hedgehog with baleful yellow eyes," said Ada. "I was lying half asleep in bed when suddenly I felt a sensation as of something sinister and unaccountable passing through the room. I sat up and looked around, and there, under the window, I saw an evil, creeping thing, a sort of monstrous hedgehog of a dirty white color with black, loathsome claws that clicked and scraped along the floor, and narrow yellow eyes of indescribable evil. It slithered along for a yard or two, always looking at me with its cruel, hideous eyes. Then, when it reached the second window, which was open, it clambered up the sill and vanished. I got up at once and went to the window. There wasn't a sign of it anywhere. Of course, I knew it must be something from another world, but it was not till I turned up Popple's chapter on local traditions that I realized what I had seen. She turned eagerly to the large brown volume that had been under her arm and read, Nicholas Harrison, an old miser, was hung at Batchford in 1763 for the murder of a farm lad who has accidentally discovered his secret hoard. His ghost is supposed to traverse the countryside, appearing sometimes as a white owl and sometimes as a huge white hedgehog. I expect you read the Popple story overnight, and that made you think you saw a hedgehog when you were only half awake, said Mrs. Nordbury, hazarding a conjecture that probably came very near the truth. Ada thought about the possibility of such a solution to her apparition. Then Mrs. Nordbury followed with, This must be hushed up, said Miss Nordbury quickly. The servants. Hushed up? Exclaimed Ada indignantly. I'm writing a long report on it for the Research Society. It was then that Hugo Nordbury, who is not naturally a man of brilliant resource, had one of the really useful inspirations of his life. It would be very wicked of us, Miss Bleak, he said, but it would be a shame to let it go further. That white hedgehog is an old joke of ours. A stuffed albino hedgehog, you know, that my father brought home from Jamaica, where they grow to enormous size. We hide it in the room with a string on it, run one end of the string through the window, then we pull as if from below, and it comes scraping along the floor, just as you've described, and finally jerks itself out the window. Taken in heaps of people, they all read up Popple and think it's old Harry Nicholson's ghost. We always stop them from writing to the papers about it, though that would be carrying matters too far. Mrs. Hatch-Mallard renewed the lease in due course, but Ada Bleak has never renewed her friendship. Ah, yes. I'm glad we found a bed, an old bed to suit the beast. Thanks for staying with me, buddy. Yeah, so sometimes people will lead supernatural conclusions to that which benefits them. It happens. It happens. So, one more poem by Walt Whitman. This is I Hear America Singing by Walt Whitman. I hear America singing, the varied carols I hear, those of mechanics, each one singing his as it should be, blithe and strong, the carpenter singing as he measures his plank or beam, the mason singing as he makes ready for work or leaves off work, The boatman singing what belongs to him in his boat. The deckhand singing on the steamboat deck. The shoemaker singing as he sits on his bench. The hatter singing as he stands. The woodcutter's song. The plowboy's on his way in the morning, or at noon intermission, or at sundown. The delicious singing of the mother, or of the young wife at work, or of the girl sewing or washing. Each singing what belongs to him or her and to none else. The day what belongs to the day. At night, the party of young fellows, robust, friendly, singing with open mouths their strong, melodious songs. So, as I sort of touched on earlier, Whitman very much self-identified as a blue-collar man of the people, a workman, a tradesman, as I, being a performer, also identify. I think it's interesting that so many poets of Whitman's day would refer to mankind and would refer to he, man, him. And Whitman goes out of his wife to include as many female examples as male. Whitman goes out of his way to say his or her instead of just putting it in the masculine. It's fascinating. He was a man of thought before his time. It's a shame that he couldn't be openly gay in his time, as that was yet another thing about his life that his society was not ready for. And I think we will adjourn there. Exactly 10:01. So, yeah, thank you for joining Fireside Tales with Wolfgang, episode 41. What did I say? Did I say wife? I certainly did not intend to use the word wife. No, Whitman was definitely goes out of his. I might have meant to say life. Anyway, I guess I'll have to look at the playback and clarify what I meant to say later. So yes, thank you for joining us for episode 41. I'll see you for Lovecast 66 this coming Thursday night. And yeah, I love you all. Good night.